So welcome everybody. Thank you so much for being here. This is the Introduction to Grants virtual open house hosted by the Santa Clara Valley Open Space Authority. My name is Jackie Latham. I'm the Grants Program Coordinator, and I have been here for about 5 years at the Open Space Authority. And I mostly oversee our outgoing grant programs, but I also help apply for grants. So that's where some of our knowledge and expertise is coming from. And I'm also joined by Monica Nanyas, if you want to say hello, Monica.
Hello, everyone. Welcome. I'm the External Funding Coordinator, and it's great to have you all here.
So the basics of this virtual open house, it is being recorded and it will be posted on our website afterward. You might not have gotten the "we are now recording" alert, but it should be recording. So anything that you say will be recorded. Just keep that in mind. For any questions, please use the Q&A at the bottom of your screen, and we'll be addressing questions at the end. And because this will be recorded and it's an open house, feel free to drop off if you need, take care of whatever you need to do, and you'll be able to come back to this later. The intention of this open house is for some high-level information and tips for those who are new to grants. Much of the information that I'll be giving is mostly from our experience having some grant programs and also as applicants for grants as well. But there's so much information out there, so we'll be giving a piece of that, but there's so many things out there we won't be able to cover everything, but hopefully you find this really useful. Also, I'll note that you'll see pictures throughout the presentation of some of our grantees from past solicitations. That's mostly just to highlight some of the work and some of their great work that you've seen. So this won't be really focused on our grant programs, but I will touch on that in the beginning. But if you're interested in learning more about our grant programs, I'll be sharing some ways to do that too. So before I get started, we're gonna share a poll at this time with 2 questions for you to answer. So I'll get that pulled up. Okay, so you should see that poll. We'll give you a few minutes for that. The first question is, what kind of organization are you representing today? Public agency, nonprofit, school or school district, foundation, a non-501c3 or a non-nonprofit organization, just an individual or other? And then the second question is, how many grants have you applied for or helped apply for in the past? So you can choose whatever best fits you there. So it looks like a little bit more. We have more people here from nonprofits than anywhere else, but a good distribution. Some people from public agencies, some from schools, non-501c3s, some interested individuals, and there's many other places that you could be coming from. And it looks like we also have a good spread of experience applying for grants, with some people being really new to grants with no experience, some in that 1 to 4 and 5 to 10, and then a couple with too many to count. So great, looks like we have lots of people here who know what they're doing. So I will keep moving along. So today I'll be touching on the Open Space Authority and our grant programs, and then we'll dive into finding funding sources, project fit for funding, the basics of fiscal sponsors, as well as applying and managing a grant, and then we should have time for questions at the end. So since 1993, the Open Space Authority has protected about 30,000 acres of open space, natural areas, watersheds, and wildlife habitat, providing ecologically friendly outdoor recreation and preserving the natural beauty and environmental health of the Santa Clara Valley. We are funded through a modest $24 a year parcel tax through Measure Q and Measure T, and a benefit assessment referred to as District 1, and various grants and gifts that total about $12 million a year. And we're proud that we're one of the most efficient public agencies out there managing land for public enjoyment. We like to say that for about every dollar of parcel tax, we raise another $3 in outside funding. And our mission is to conserve the natural environment, support agriculture, and connect people to nature by protecting open spaces, natural areas, and working farms and ranches for future generations. And we acknowledge that the Santa Clara Valley Open Space Authority works within lands that were originally stewarded by the Awaswas, Chochenyo, Mutsun, and Tamian speaking peoples. And today we're honored to partner with the Amamutsun Tribal Band, Muwekma Ohlone Tribe of the San Francisco Bay Area, and Tamian Nation in our shared work to protect and restore the environment and connect people to land. This map shows the Open Space Authority jurisdiction, which includes the cities of Campbell, Milpitas, Morgan Hill, San Jose, and Santa Clara, as well as some unincorporated areas of the Santa Clara County. A main focus of our work is resilience to extreme weather, as in the past decade, our region has experienced direct impacts of more extreme weather patterns, such as floods, fires, heavy rainfall, etc. And the lands we protect provide a buffer to these major weather events. So at the Open Space Authority, we focus on investing in nature and nature-based solutions as a critical piece of protecting local communities. We believe that nature is an irreplaceable life support system for our communities and all who live in the Santa Clara Valley. And by caring for nature, nature can provide the important natural resources that we all depend on now and forever. The authority operates 4 open space preserves that are open to the public 365 days a year and provide over 33 miles of trails for hiking, mountain biking, and horseback riding. We also offer a range of educational experiences throughout the year that includes docent-led hikes, stargazing events, wildflower walks, and other in-person and virtual educational events. Connecting people to nature is a huge part of our mission, and our grant programs are one of the main ways that we do that. So a little overview about our 2 grant programs that help connect people living in urban areas to nature. We have an urban grant program. We've funded about $5.6 million worth of projects through that. That's funded by Measure Q and Measure T. We've had approximately 5 solicitations and awarded about 74 projects. Eligible applicants are nonprofits, schools and school districts, 501c3s, or through a fiscal sponsor. And we're excited that we have an upcoming solicitation for this solicitation in May. So if that's something you're interested in, please go to our grants webpage and join our listserv. I will be having another workshop all about applying for that program. We also have another grant program. We call it the 20% funding program. We've awarded about $9 million through that. That's a rolling application, and the eligible entities are the cities and the county in our jurisdiction. So jumping into the intro to grants, real meat of the information here. So the overview of funding sources, you can see here there's many different kinds of grants. Some include federal, state, local, foundations, corporate, and loans, but there's many more types out there. We have some experience with some of these, but they're, depending on the type of project that you're doing and the type of organization that you are in, you might be really focused on a certain kind of type of funding source. So we'll cover some of them here today. If you are interested in starting to learn more about grant opportunities, a good place to start is by joining listservs and newsletters. So some links are here. The grants.gov is where all the federal grant opportunities are posted. The California state grant opportunities are at grants.ca.gov. And we're going to be following up this open house with these links for you, so you don't have to write them down, as well as some examples of newsletters that you can join of specific agencies in California, such as the State Coastal Conservancy or Wildlife Conservation Board. And then there's also plenty of local agencies that have newsletters, listservs that you can join. We also recommend attending webinars to learn more about grant opportunities, as well as looking at partner organizations or organizations that are similar to your type of work and trying to find out what their funding sources are. When you're considering applying for a grant, some things to keep in mind to be ready for a grant. One is that grants are not free money. They are a lot of work, not only to apply for them, but also to manage them. So just keep that in mind as you start that process. You'll also want to know your approval processes for accepting funds if awarded. So things like authorized signers, the banking information for your organization. Do you have generally accepted accounting principles or GAAP? What are your conflict of interest policies? Are you audit ready? There's lots of things to make sure you're ready to accept those funds. And if you are funded, some require that you are kicking off your project in 30 to 60 days after that is signed, or sometimes it could be a much longer timeline until your project can start. So we'll talk more about possible timelines, but that is something to be in mind, to keep in mind as how ready you are to actually implement your project. For funding fit, we like to think of it as a chicken and egg of the funding and the project. And generally, it's usually better to start with a project idea instead of creating a project based around a funding opportunity. But there are times when you might have a project in mind and you might make some changes or adjust it around a funding opportunity a little bit. But in general, it's going to be easier if you have a project first. So an example might be, let's say you are aware of funding for an electric vehicle that comes out, and you know that your organization has some interest in buying some EVs at some point, but maybe you're not actually ready to purchase those cars and manage the care of those cars or charge those cars. So it might not make sense for you to jump into an application to get an EV that month, but maybe that's something that you would look at that grant solicitation in the future and kind of prepare for the next year or so, so that when it comes around the next time, you are actually ready to accept funds to implement that kind of project. There's a lot of work that goes into getting to know the grant before you apply. So you'll want to read any summaries that are available, attend any webinars. If you think that you're interested in that grant opportunity, read the entire guidelines and the application if available and make some summaries yourself. You'll really want to make sure that you are eligible for that solicitation. So the details will be in those webinars, but also looking at those guidelines and making sure that you are an eligible entity. That's when you'll find out more about the grant timeline and if that aligns with your project timeline. If you can see who they have funded in the past projects can tell you a lot about what they're looking for. You'll want to find out if there's a requirement for match. And also if the project in general is aligned with your kind of work. So you'll want to get to know the funder and if their values or your work are aligned, if that grant opportunity is really aligned with the type of project that you have. And keep in mind that every funder is different. There's different organization makeups and processes. For example, some grant funders can talk to you during a solicitation and answer questions, and many are not able to. So big differences between funders. And then also you'll want to make sure that you're considering how realistic is this funding opportunity. Try to find out how complex the application is, how much work it will be for you to apply, how competitive it is, and how long do you have before it's due. If you find out and it's due in just a couple weeks, it might not be enough time for you to do a 50-page application and get everything in place, but it might be something that you could prepare for the next time. We'll talk a little bit about fiscal sponsors. Those allow a group or individuals to create a project that can receive grants and deductible charitable contributions without forming a nonprofit entity or obtaining a taxes exemption. So a 501c3 organization is a tax exempt organization. Many people use the terms interchangeably, such as nonprofit, charity, exempt organization, and 501c3. 501c3 is the portion of the US Revenue Code that allows for federal tax exemption of nonprofits. So that could be public charities, private foundations, or private operating foundations. So for some organizations, it might make a lot of sense for them to become a nonprofit, but for others, it might not. And so if you're a type of organization that you don't need a nonprofit or it doesn't make sense to become a nonprofit status, you might seek other modes of funding, such as a fiscal sponsor. So if you are in that category and you're considering if you might need a fiscal sponsor, the first place to start would be to really consider if for the end goal, if you really need a fiscal sponsor to achieve that goal. One example might be that if you work for a neighborhood association and you have a one-time project that doesn't have ongoing maintenance, let's say you're installing benches and it's going to be minimal upkeep, that might be an example of something that you might need just a lump sum of money or a loan, and you won't need a fiscal sponsor or an ongoing partner for that work to be done. But if you think you do need a fiscal sponsor, there's a few things to consider. Is this a relationship that you would be managing long term and can help you get many funding sources down the road? Or is it more of a short term partnership for one kind of funding? There are professional fiscal sponsors out there. Would you want to partner with one, or is it more of a partner organization? If you are looking into professional fiscal sponsors, they are really helpful. You can set up introductory calls with them, find out if you have value alignment, and ask about their offerings, their fees, etc. So whether it's a professional fiscal sponsor or a partner organization serving as a fiscal sponsor for just one project, you will want to find out about their offerings, fees, their level of involvement, and their process. You'll also want to make sure that there's compatible insurance, especially if they're in another state. And you'll want to make sure that you have some likely funding sources identified for your project. There's lots of information out there about fiscal sponsors. I have some links again that we'll be sending out after. These links have great questions to ask a potential fiscal sponsor, as well as questions you might be asked by a potential fiscal sponsor. There's two types of structures of fiscal sponsor called Model A and Model C. Some of these have really good visuals of what that looks like and what your best fit might be. And the other resources like where to start, finding a good fit, resources, and directories. So if this is something you're interested in, I would take some time to look through this. Okay, so let's say that you are ready to apply for the grant. Again, you'll want to make sure that you read the entire guidelines and application, as well as anyone who might be working on that with you. Make sure that they are really familiar with guidelines. You'll want to consider the funder's focus and how that aligns with your project and your organization. So there might be certain things that you want to highlight about your project because that is a theme or something of the funding opportunity. You'll want to consider how much money is available and how competitive it is. And some things really come first if you are applying for a grant, such as letters of support. If you are asking for letters of support, we recommend that you ask really early to potential partners, either partners that would be working on your project with you or would be vouching for your organization in some way. We recommend that you provide a paragraph or a template for them to use so that they can quickly get that back to you and turn that in well ahead of time. And there's also sometimes project documentation, such as a resolution that needs to be done that's a little bit outside of your hands that you would want to get started on as soon as you can. But in general, we recommend that you take advantage of opportunities like additional documentation or letters of support, pictures, maps, things that will help tell your project story. You'll also want to make a timeline and assign roles and work backwards. Really planning on turning in your application early. I would say try to turn it in the day before it's due. That way, if your computer has an issue, your server dies, the website crashes, whatever that is, that you are ahead of that, and then you have time to solve that problem. So working backwards and looking at the scoring rubric as you go along and making sure that you are answering each of those questions and trying to self-evaluate how many points might I get for this section and what do I need to do to beef up that answer. And we always recommend that you save your application materials for future reference. Whether you turn that application in or not, if you start working on something, that information can be really helpful for you in the future. You also should assume that the funder is not familiar with your project and consider that the application may be reviewed by multiple people or multiple committees. So they might not be as familiar as maybe the grant funder that you might know. So it's really important to fully answer the questions, and you might need to restate your project and organization mission within your application. Similarly, the reviewers might not know your field or your sector super well, so you'll want to define any acronyms and avoid any jargon or other technical details that, if you are using, that you really want to be clear of what those are so that the reviewers have a full idea of your project. You should also note that some applications are made available for the public after submitted. We really recommend that multiple people proofread your application before it's submitted. There are common typos out there that we see, one of which is people use the same kind of body of their application for multiple grant solicitations, which is a great idea. It's great to not recreate the wheel, but you do want to make sure that you are checking to make sure that the funder name is updated, that the grant solicitation name is updated, and that it all looks the same. It's great to make sure that, the font is the same throughout it and that the just kind of the aesthetics are consistent. So when describing your project, keep in mind that the title and the summary, there might be an executive summary, it can be really important. That's usually what has the most eyes on it and will really tell the basics of your project. So sometimes the board of directors, that might be the only thing that they see. And it might not be scored, but it's really important. So you will need to think about the funder and what kind of thing you need to say in that project title. They might have guidance such as keep your project title super short, or it might, allow a lot of characters. And in that case, if let's say you're applying for a really large regional program or like a statewide solicitation, you might want to highlight the geography of your area. If you're in the South Bay, maybe South Bay goes in the title. You need to be concise, but also tell a little bit of that story and give some context in your project name or the executive summary. Also, you'll want to make sure that your project deliverables and the project budget are consistent with each other. So if there's a really big focus in your project that you're talking about, make sure that that is showing up in your budget in some way that is also the focus. Make sure that you're fully answering the questions. So you might want to use bullet points or bold text to highlight some of those things, and make sure that you're using plain language when you can to really emphasize those main points, so that it's really clear to any reviewers that you have answered each question. This is an example of what a public agency timeline might be for a review and award and grant agreement period. This is to illustrate that sometimes public agencies have a really fast turnaround time, and sometimes it can be a really slow process. But there's also private funders, many other kinds of funders that also would have potentially a really short or really long timeline between when you submit your application and when you have that grant agreement in place. So if possible, it's great if you can find that out beforehand so that your project is actually ready to go when the project can actually begin. Some other notes about timeline. The grant funded project work often can't begin before the grant agreement is executed, even if you've been awarded. Some funding can be retroactive, but some cannot. So that's something to make sure that you're really clear about. And some grants are reimbursement based and some are a lump sum in the beginning. So that's something else to be really aware of. Like I mentioned in the last slide, it can take over a year to access that grant funding. And sometimes it can be really fast. So you might be counting on it taking a year, but it could happen much quicker, and then you need to be ready to implement your project. In general, for those timelines, track opportunities moving forward. So like that electric vehicle example, maybe you're not ready to apply for this exact solicitation, but it's something that you want to keep in mind for the next one. So if you win the grant, some basics of managing the grant would be to have a meeting typically or familiarize all the staff members that might be working on pieces of the grant. It might just be you, but it might be other people. So you might need to have your financial team in place to submit reimbursements. You might need people on the ground that are delivering the program or the project ready to give you project updates and pictures. And it's always great to build in organizational systems for yourself. The grant management system might have those in place, but it might be necessary for you to build in your own calendar reminders. Similarly, it's great to come up with some organizational system for your filing of your records. So all of those reports that you turn in, you'll want to keep those also in your own records. And a huge piece of information and advice would be for you to have a great relationship with your funder if possible. That grant manager is likely your best resource for asking for help, possibly for extensions or if a project detail has changed. Some funders are able to be flexible, and that grant manager can really help you navigate that. And some are not able to be, and their policies are more strict, but that grant manager can still help you figure out what you can or can't really ask for. So keeping a positive relationship with that grant funder is really helpful. And similarly, if you're in conversation during the application process with that funder, they might be a good resource for you during that solicitation or future ones as well. If you didn't get the grant, don't give up. It's probably worth trying again, depending on that project fit. If it's something that you think is a great fit, it might have just been a really competitive process. If feedback is available, ask for it. Some funders are able to give feedback and some are not. You should review what worked and lessons learned internally with your team and review what was awarded, what projects did get money, what was different about their funding request or their costs or the numbers of people served or their project objectives, and kind of take that and see how that compares to your application. Overall, we say that it's much easier to get the grant if you have the project defined first. So these are kind of big takeaways. Before you dig in, really have your project as clearly defined as you can before digging in whenever possible. Keep in mind that all funders are different and your relationship with that funder can be really important. A rule of thumb is that grants often get more difficult as you go up from local to state to federal. So some of those more local opportunities might be an easier one to kind of get started if you are new with grants. Um, Same goes for just the big range of differences between funders. So some private funders might be invitation only, but some might have an open solicitation. And some of those are really simple to apply for. And so that might be a good opportunity to start with. In general, if there are rules and guidance, you'll want to make sure that you follow those. So, for example, if they are asking the same question multiple times, answer it multiple times. Might be that different people are looking at different parts of the application. You need to make sure that you turn everything in on time. If they are offering public meetings and they encourage you to attend, then you'll want to send a representative to attend that. And the biggest thing is to not wait until the last minute so that you feel really prepared and that you have that timeline to work backwards from. So here are some of the resources, and like I mentioned in the beginning, we will be following up with everyone who registered for this open house with these links. So some information that you can find about the Open Space Authority grants are on our grants page. You can also contact me, and if you want more information about our upcoming solicitation, that's a great place to start. The State Coastal Conservancy has a really great webinar called Improve Your Grant Writing Skills. We'll link to that, as well as the fiscal sponsorship information and a couple other sources of information there. So at this time, we will start answering some questions. You can add them into the Q&A if you haven't yet. And if you'd like to circle back later, like I said, this will be posted on our website. So if you're curious about what questions were asked, you could come on back and watch the recording and see what we come up with. Otherwise, thank you so much for attending. I hope that this was useful and informative, whether you are brand new to grants or you're pretty familiar. Maybe you learned one or two new helpful tips or tricks. And we are available if you'd like to follow up. Thank you so much. And we will stay around for any questions, but so far it doesn't look like we have any. So maybe we just gave all the possible information you might need. And if you are online and you want to raise your hand, we can also do that so that you could go off mute and we could answer your question that way. But it looks like, okay, looks like we have a question. So I'm going to unmute you, Lydia.
Hi, thank you so much for hosting this webinar. I'm on um, my local neighborhood association board, and I appreciated the information you gave about, trying to get funding for a one-time project. I recently have been researching ways to continue funding for, there's this park project in San Jose that has stalled because there isn't enough funding. The owners of these houses, they gave the land to be made into a park, but it's kind of in limbo. And so I've been trying to research ways to make sure that we can keep that momentum going. And sometimes it's hard to know who the owner of those projects is. Is it the city of San Jose? Is it the county? I mean, it's obviously not the county. I did apply for a county grant, but just kind of like trying to get more information about how do I make sure that I am not kind of barking up the wrong tree when it comes to this stuff, or that I am the right person to be applying for these things. I just don't want people to forget that we had slated this park to go in. I don't necessarily need to be in charge of everything, but I want to make sure that I'm taking as much initiative as I can. Can you talk a little bit about like interested individuals who try to get projects like that going, and what is their best where have you seen success with those kinds of projects, and what have they done that's what are some best practices, and where have they gone wrong?
Yeah, great question. So I think some of your specifics might be better for us to talk offline, and maybe we'll be able to help you navigate that. But in general, I think kind of like you said, it is really important to try to get a hold of like the city department manager. Maybe the people in that neighborhood might be able to lead you to that. But I think you touched on the most important thing, which is getting to whoever, if you're doing like a construction or a longer term project on a piece of land, the entity that owns that land is going to be the most critical. And oftentimes they need to be the applicant for that funding, which can be the trickiest thing. So if you want to follow up with me offline, I'd be happy to talk to you more about that specific thing.
Thank you so much. I appreciate
Yeah.
it.
Thanks, Lydia.
And Jackie, we do have a question somebody just posted, so I'll go ahead and read it to you.
Oh, sure.
The question is, could we partner with a large organization such as Post to have the grant proceeds go to them?
Good question. So yes, so Post is the Peninsula Open Space Trust. They are a nonprofit land trust in the peninsula that does a lot of work in conservation in the area. It's very possible that they could be a great partner for a project, depending on what that is, and depending on if they're focused on public access or conservation, they would have different people within their teams that you would work with. I think the best way to start would be to try to have a conversation with them if they might be the landowner, and if so, they would definitely be the applicant or the partner on an application. But if they're not, then again, that might be a more specific question that if we followed up with separate, we might be able to help you navigate. Again, kind of hard to say without knowing more about the project. Great. It looks like those are the main questions. Again, if you have more questions, maybe specifics about your project, would be happy to schedule a phone call for later and kind of get into the details of that. Otherwise, again, thank you all so much for attending, and I hope you have a great rest of your day.